Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicola Sigoloni, and I'm with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Rensselaer County. For those who are not familiar with us, Cornell Cooperative Extension is a community-based organization that brings research and education directly to people of our county. We work on a wide range of topics: nutrition, health, agriculture, and all with the goal of making a real difference in the lives of people we serve. Tonight, I'm really excited to bring you a conversation on a topic that has been generating a lot of buzz lately: GLP-1 medication and weight loss treatments. Whether you have heard of them on the news, from your doctor, from a friend, we want to give you a chance to hear directly from two incredible experts who can help us make sense of all of it. Before we get started, I want to take a quick moment to explain how this evening worked technically. We are on a Zoom webinar tonight, which is a little different from a regular Zoom meeting that we all used to. There is no traditional chat function available, but if you have a question at any point during the presentation, please use the Q&A button, which should be at the bottom, right under the slide that Dr. Berry just put up. Right at the bottom is Q&A button of your screen, and you can go ahead and type your question there, and the question will be saved there, and we will bring up the question at the moment in which we do the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So they're going to be addressed at the end. But if you have a question, don't hesitate to put it in. We're going to have a Q&A section at the end. So, without further ado, let me introduce our speakers for this evening. Our first speaker this evening is Dr. Dan Berry, André Benzodon Associate Professor in the Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell University. Dr. Berry received his PhD in molecular nutrition from Case Western Reserve University and brings deep expertise in metabolic health and obesity research. He teaches about GLP-1 medication, and is here tonight to help us understand the science behind these treatments in a clear and accessible way. Dr. Berry, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nick. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And thank you to the organizers for generating this webinar on trying to help us understand GLP-1 and weight loss medications. And so tonight I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk to you a little bit about these new and exciting drugs that Nick was mentioning that have been on the news, maybe on social media feeds, and also have been maybe family or friends might be taking these GLP-1 medications like Ozempic or Wegovy. So while many people know that these drugs are useful for weight loss, many people or fewer people actually understand what they're actually for, how they work, or what they're meant for, and what's the benefits and risk of these drugs that are on the market. So my goal tonight is not to convince you on whether to take these drugs or not to take them, but rather to provide you with an understanding of the biology and how these drugs regulate systemic metabolism, and so that you can make more informed decisions as you go forward. Okay. So the outline that I want to go over with tonight is understanding how GLP-1 medications work. Who are these medications designed for? So who's supposed to be taking these, and why would they be taking these drugs? And I think we can't have this discussion about these medications without discussing how our body regulates hunger. So I want to go through some biology of how hunger systems work. I will then go into how these GLP-1s then coordinate with this hunger system to then control appetite and regulate blood glucose levels. Then I want to talk about the time frame of these GLP-1 drug discoveries and how this all came about, and then the benefits and risk of these drugs. And I think maybe one of the most important questions that we might have in our minds is what happens if we stop taking these drugs? So first, understanding GLP-1 drugs is understanding that this is actually a natural hormone in our body called glucagon-like peptide 1. And that this glucagon peptide-like 1 actually controls hunger, digestion, and promotes insulin release to actually control blood sugar levels. And these drugs are actually meant for patients with obesity. And so obesity here is characterized by having a body mass index of about 30. It's also meant for patients with type 2 diabetes. Patients that also have an increased risk for metabolic diseases such as hypertension, atherosclerosis, or cardiovascular disease are also considered candidates for these types of drugs as well. And the outcomes of these drugs are actually pretty well received, which is about 15 to 20% weight loss over a period of a year's time of taking these drugs. Patients also will experience reduced hunger as well as controlled blood glucose levels. So, before we get into the details of really how GLP-1 or glucagon-like peptide 1 works and how these medications came about, I really want to talk about how hunger is working in our bodies. Because hunger is not necessarily about willpower or discipline, but it's actually a tightly controlled biological process within our bodies that we rely on the stomach, the intestine, fat tissue, and hormones to communicate with our brain to tell us when we feel hungry and versus when we feel full. And we're going to use these natural cues that are in our body to actually learn how to or when to consume this food and eat that food at the right appropriate times. So, what does hunger actually mean? So, if we think about when we're hungry, our stomach is usually empty. And that when that stomach is empty, it's going to release hunger hormones. Hunger hormones can include something like ghrelin, which will then leave the stomach and travel in the bloodstream until it reaches our brain. And in our brain, it'll regulate a process in the hypothalamus that we want to consider to be the appetite control center. So this is where a bunch of nerves are together, and that these hormones will then activate these neurons inside the hypothalamus to then tell the brain and translate that signal into a hunger response. And this is where you would then go out and seek food to try to eat that food. Now, once you ingest that food, then those signals will become diminished. So what happens once these signals then are diminished? Well, as we eat that meal and the food expands in your stomach, and if you eat a carbohydrate-rich meal, you might also have rises in blood sugar levels. And then as the food enters your stomach and stretches it out, it'll release a new set of hormones. And these new hormones will then travel through the blood system to then target the hypothalamus, that appetite control center, to then turn off the eating behavior. Now, also too what will happen is that the digested food that you're consuming will start to begin to get into circulation and will be taken up by your fat tissue or adipose tissue. This fat tissue will then release hormones as well that will reinforce that stomach hormone signaling pathway in the hypothalamus to stop eating behavior. So ultimately, these signals will then tell the brain that you are full and that you can then stop eating, and that'll be the end of that process. Now, what ends up happening to the digested material in your stomach? So, after we eat a meal, such as a carbohydrate-rich meal, those carbohydrates will be broken down into glucose. Glucose will then be released into the bloodstream and elevating the blood glucose in your blood. The pancreas will then sense this and secrete a powerful hormone called insulin. Insulin will then travel in the bloodstream and activate cells to then take up that glucose from the bloodstream. So anybody who knows that type 2 diabetic patients would know that the higher levels of blood glucose are not a very good thing, and that you want to limit the amount of blood glucose in your body. We may be familiar with glucose being associated with other diseases such as vision, blindness, as well as neuropathy, as well as diabetic ulcers, and leading to amputation. And this is because glucose can be toxic to cells. And so, what we're trying to do with insulin is try to remove that glucose out of the bloodstream so that it can be used by cells for energy or it can be stored for a later time. So, again, right, that glucose enters the bloodstream and then allows for the pancreas to secrete insulin. Insulin will then target these cells to uptake glucose, and then the cells can use that for energy or store it for a later time. So this is under normal physiology. And so what happens under the obesity and type 2 diabetes is also this signals become disrupted. So under healthy signaling pathways, we can think about a robust communication between the stomach and the brain where these signals are communicating back and forth to tell us when we're hungry and when we're full. We also have robust signaling between these signals for controlling blood sugar levels by maintaining normal homeostatic conditions as far as regulating insulin and glucose sensitivity. What happens in obesity and type 2 diabetes is that these signals start to become disrupted and break down. So you end up with stronger hunger signals coming from the stomach to talk to the brain, Or the brain also becomes resistant to the full signals, so suggesting that they no longer respond to the full signal. These signals also break down at the pancreas level. So now the pancreas is no longer responding as well to glucose levels in the blood, therefore changing the amount of insulin being released into the bloodstream to then communicate to maintain normal blood sugar levels. And this is actually where the GLP-1 medications actually come into play. Is that we are thinking that in this disrupted signaling pathway under obesity and type 2 diabetes is that giving GLP-1s will actually start to push the system back into normality, meaning that we can now start to restore those signals back to controlling hunger and appetite, as well as maintaining our blood sugar levels. Okay, so how does these GLP-1s work? So getting back to this idea that we ingest a meal, once we ingest that meal, now we can end up breaking it down in our in our intestines, and then we can release that naturally producing hormone that we have called GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, and that'll be released now into the bloodstream. Now, once it's released into the bloodstream, it has three avenues in which it can work. It's going to then talk to the pancreas to prime the pancreas to secrete insulin. So think about it as a way of priming these tissues to get ready for a glucose load. So it's going to say there's glucose in the system. The pancreas needs to prepare by releasing insulin to tell the body to take up that glucose and use it for energy. It's going to have another action, which is going to talk to the brain. It's going to go back to the appetite control center in the brain in the hypothalamus, where it's going to then suppress appetite and make you feel that you have less cravings and reduce and make you feel a sense of satisfied or full. So it's going to slow down the appetite that you have. And the third process is going to be involved in the stomach, which is going to have a process of slow digestion. So it's going to make you feel fuller for a longer period of time. And it's going to make and you can also imagine that if your stomach is still feeling like it's full, it's not going to secrete those hunger hormones anymore. So you're going to not have that effect in the brain to feel like you need to eat again. So rather, now what you have is slower digestion, feeling fuller for a longer period of time, reducing those appetite-inducing hormones that would normally talk to the brain to continue to eat. Okay. So now what we want to talk about, now that we know how GLP-1s work, now we want to talk about a little bit about the GLP-1 drug discovery timeline. What's interesting though is that we've been hearing about GLP-1s very recently and thinking that maybe that these drugs are very new, when in reality these drugs have been around for almost 20 years now, and that the science behind GLP-1 has been around for more than 40 years. And so back in the 1980s, there was the discovery of GLP-1. And they found the actions that we just discussed about how it can control appetite and how it can regulate blood glucose levels. But one thing that was noticed was that GLP-1 was very short-lived in the bloodstream, meaning that when we secrete that into our system, it gets broken down right away. And you can imagine that would be true, right? Because if you eat breakfast, you feel full, and then by lunchtime you feel hungry again. And that's because GLP-1 would come up and then it would come back down. So it's got a short half-life in our body, meaning that it would not be a very good drug target otherwise because it's just a short-lived molecule that you would have to inject pretty regularly to your body. But interestingly enough, there were scientists that were studying a lizard called the Gila monster in the southwest of the United States and that lives in northwestern Mexico. And they were studying the venom of the Gila monster because they were interested in understanding how this animal controls appetite. And one thing about the Gila monster is that it can go months or almost a year without eating. And so the scientists were interested in understanding how does that happen. And so they found a protein called extendin 4, and that extendin 4 looked just like, very similar to human GLP-1. So they hypothesized that maybe this extendin 4, which controls appetite in the Gila monster, could control appetite in the humans. If only we could make modifications to our human GLP-1, that we could then do that. So what they decided to do was make drugs that looked very similar to the Gila monster GLP-1 that would give it a long-lasting effect that could work in human bodies. So that led to the first GLP-1 medication called extenditide, and that was under the trade name of Byetta. And this first drug was very effective at controlling type 2 diabetes because we could see that when we gave patients GLP-1, it was able to reduce blood glucose levels. The problem was is that it was very short acting, and you had to deliver it twice a day. So you had to have two shots in every day to take this drug. And the thing that they saw was very modest weight loss. So you only lost maybe about 5% body mass over the period of time on this GLP-1 modification. But it gave promise to the future that we could potentially continue to modify this GLP-1 molecule or mimetic to see if we can keep improving it to increase efficacy of the drug. This led to the development of liraglutide. And liraglutide was a big advantage over the exenatide because you could now do once daily shots to get greater convenience and better results. And you also had better results in weight control. So now we could see about 7 to 8% reduction in body weight. So continuing to build on these GLP-1 drugs. So this is now looking at the third generation now of GLP-1 drugs. Now we start to see where this breakthrough happened in around the 2020s, which is the semaglutide, which is now the once weekly injection of the GLP-1 drug. And when you look at the clinical trials and weight loss, you can see about 15% weight loss in these clinical trials. And that's again over almost over a year. Usually you see 52 weeks on this drug to see the 15% weight loss. And what I'd like to note is that semaglutide is under the trademarks of Ozempic and Wegovy. So Novo Nordisk is the maker of semaglutide, and they market it under two names. One is prescribed Ozempic is prescribed for diabetes, where Wegovy is prescribed for weight loss. So again, it's the same drug, just marketed under different names and prescribed for different reasons. The newest hormone or the newest therapy that's out there is the tirzepatide, which includes GLP-1 drug, but also this other protein, GIP, which is a gastric inhibitory polypeptide, which kind of mimics the same activity as GLP-1, but rather than working on insulin action, it works on fat metabolism. So you're going to actually end up burning more lipids than regulating glucose in the response to that drug. And surprisingly, tirzepatide has about a 20% weight loss in clinical trials over a course of 52 weeks or 1 year. And this is made under Eli Lilly's branch of Zepbound, and that is prescribed also for weight loss. You've also might have heard of Mounjaro, which is also tirzepatide, and that's also Eli Lilly's drug for prescribed for type 2 diabetes. So again, these drugs are just being repurposed for weight loss or diabetes, depending on the manufacturer, but they're considered to be the same drug. Okay, so now that we know where these drugs are made and how they're produced and how they function, now let's talk about the benefits and risk for these medications. So I think the benefits are quite obvious, which is that we could see significant weight loss in these 15 to 20% weight loss with these drugs. We can see considerable control of blood sugar levels by lowering blood glucose levels for type 2 diabetic patients. We also see that there's reduction in food cravings and hunger. Now, the other thing that's important is that there's been new evidence to suggest pretty much on a weekly basis that these drugs are doing something new. And so now there's been major scientific advances in looking at heart health. So you can see that there's now a reduction in heart problems such as heart attack and stroke. There's also been evidence to support now that there's liver function health, which is preventing against ectopic lipid accumulation in the liver or fatty liver disease. There's also been improvements in blood pressure. There's also been changes in quality of life. And again, these are all going to be benefits that are going to be varied to vary by person to person. And so I would recommend if you're interested in taking these medications that you would then consider to talk to your healthcare provider to see which GLP-1 medication might be right for you, and depending on which metabolic disease you might be interested in. And the possible side effects are typical, which is that you would have nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, and heartburn. I'm going to come back here to the muscle reduction here in a minute. And these are very common side effects. However, the less common ones, but I think are very important, are the inflammation of the pancreas and inflammation of the gallbladder. And so if there's conditions that are surrounding those two organs, I would consider talking to your healthcare provider about those as well. And again, everybody's going to be different, so responses and to side effects could be should be warranted and be considered. Getting back to this muscle reduction and sarcopenia potential is that GLP-1 drugs cause body weight loss across the board. And so these drugs will cause a reduction in skeletal muscle or muscle mass, which is going to have an impact on strength, metabolism, stability. And so, one thing that we want to be considerate of, and there's ongoing trials and scientific evidence to suggest that we should probably start thinking about doing resistance exercise or weight-bearing exercises to help support muscle mass and strength to prevent it from decreasing with GLP-1 drugs, as well as adequate protein intake to make sure that we buffer muscle building to support proper muscle building. I would also suggest that if you in certain age brackets are more susceptible to muscle wasting or sarcopenia, and so I would suggest that if an older age bracket, you would consider to do more consideration for muscle mass and strength and exercise training in that regard. Okay. I'd like to spend a second to talk about the dosing regimen because I think dosing is very important here because it's going to tell you how your body acclimates as well as potential for variation and side effects. So here's just an example of the dosing regimen where you would start out with a smaller dose and then you would spend a month on that dose and then you would move up to that dose as long as it's well tolerated and you would keep moving up in doses as need be as the benefit is required. Now, this is a slow process of ramping up this dose, and that's because you want your body to adjust to the drug. You also want to lower the chances of adverse events or side effects that could come about from taking these drugs. And again, everyone is different. So if you feel that this lower dose is working well for you, you should maintain that lower dose as long as you can, or ramp up when you need to, if you think you can. But again, I think you would want to consult with your healthcare provider to make sure that you're following proper guidance on all changes in this process. But this is the reason why we want to start out with a lower dose and work your way up is to prevent against these side effects as well as to help your body adjust to these different doses at various times. Okay, so what happens if we stop taking this drug now? So while these medications are very powerful while we're on them, they quiet our food thoughts, they manage our hunger very well, and they make our blood sugar more stable. But once we take a look at how we stop taking these drugs, we can see now that maybe these thoughts start to come back more often. Food hunger and food thoughts and portion sizes are increasing because you feel hungry more. Blood sugar becomes unstable. And again, as this continues to re without time with time, you can end up reoccurring more weight gain. So suggesting that these drugs are not, that these effects can be reversed. And so it suggests, right, that these drugs can cause, if you stop taking them, will cause weight gain, but it will also lead to more instability with food frequency and as well as with blood sugar. I would recommend that you would consult with while you're on these drugs, to consult with healthcare providers that are specialized in diet and exercise to make sure that you have healthy life course changes so that you have benefits of that. So once you stop taking the drug, you can continue to have a healthy lifestyle by maintaining a healthy diet as well as with exercise. So some considerations that I would put forth here is that do I meet the medical criteria? So you want to think a little bit about whether or not do you fit the criteria of obesity and type 2 diabetes and other metabolic disease risk? I would also say, can you commit long term to this? Because this is going to be a long-term commitment. As I mentioned, that these results come about after having about a year's worth of time on these drugs. Can you afford it? Affordability here is very important for these drugs because some insurance companies are not providing coverage for these drugs and they're very expensive for people to get a hold of. And I would also say that maintaining muscle mass through resistance exercise, as well as maintaining a healthy and nutrition forward diet, is really part of the consideration, so that you not only lose weight and manage your blood glucose the ways that you want to, as well as your hunger, but also to start realizing about lifestyle choices, changes that can help you maintain when you come off this drug as well. And so that's all I have as far as my portion is concerned. And so I would be happy to turn it over now to my colleague, Dr. Angela Odoms-Young.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Berry. That was incredible, informative. Just a quick reminder that this session is being recorded for everybody that may be joining late. You're going to be able to listen to this beautiful piece that Dr. Berry went over with us, and very informative. Thank you so much, Dr. Berry, again. And now I am pleased to introduce our second speaker for the evening, Dr. Angela Odoms-Young, Nancy Schlegel, Associate Professor of Maternal and Child Nutrition at Cornell University, where she directs the Food and Nutrition Education in Communities program and the New York State Expanded Food and Nutrition Education program. Dr. Odoms-Young brings a powerful perspective on how social and structural factors shape our health, and she is here to help us think about the GLP-1 medication in a broader community context. We're going to have a Q&A answer at the end, so put your questions in the chat, in the Q&A box. And Dr. Odoms-Young, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours. Muted, Dr. Odoms-Young, your microphone is muted.
Okay.
There you go. We can hear you.
And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm going to talk. Thank you so much. And thanks for the invitation. It's really very exciting to be invited to be a part of this webinar because we, from the Food and Nutrition Education and Communities program, and as a critical issue lead for human nutrition, food safety, and security and obesity prevention for Cornell Cooperative Extension, it's just really exciting to be a part of an extension webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit where Dr. Berry left off to talk about community context and really the implications for population health. We do have some overlap, but not much because we work on different areas of nutrition, but it's really interesting because part of this is the landscape when it comes to GLP-1 medications and really shifting consumer behaviors. As Dr. Berry mentioned, I'm not, and I definitely, because I'm interested in population health, am not here to say yay or nay or to encourage, but to really just talk about the landscape of what's happening and some implications and importance if we think about population health. So really amid a rapidly evolving landscape, GLP-1s are shaping the way millions approach weight loss and diet. As Dr. Berry mentioned, initially for diabetes, the therapies are now really at the forefront of obesity care. And you see headlines every day that's sparking this debate across medical and consumer circles about what is the implication of these medicines or these medications, what's the long-term safety of these medications, etc. So this adoption is reshaping habits, industry. So you're going to see some products emerging that are focused specifically on for those taking GLP-1s, and then cultural attitudes. And this is changing pretty rapidly. This is a report from Morgan Stanley that looked at investments. And so the prescriptions have grown about 40% year after year. And there is some consensus that there's a projected 43 million in combined revenue. So if we just think about the broader, this is from an investment portfolio of the idea about these things are growing so rapidly and consumer behavior is changing around the medications that we're seeing growth in their uptake. Current guidelines for weight management and also overall health still have an idea that we need to integrate lifestyle modifications, dietary interventions, and pharmacotherapy as a possibility. And it's particularly when we think about those that have increased challenge, that really behavioral modification and dietary restrictions are really the backbone But the thought now, particularly with GLP-1s, is that pharmacologic agents play a role, particularly in cases where lifestyle interventions have proven insufficient. And I want to talk a little bit about the population health because my focus is population health. There has been effectiveness, as Dr. Berry mentioned, about 10 to 20% reduction for a variety of outcomes. Although the data across the board is mixed, there's like recent studies that have come out to talk about, what is the long-term weight effect on weight. Uh, Several recent systematic reviews have come out to talk about regain. And then Dr. Berry ended with that. So the idea that there's significant weight regain where people normally return to baseline after about nearly 2 years if they stop the medication. And then long-term safety is under study. So like for certain populations, even though we think of it as sort of like this widespread medication that can be used, there are certain populations that we really don't understand the risk. So studies really haven't been done during pregnancy, and Dr. Berry, during the question and answer, may be able to talk more about this. So, from a population perspective, there's been kind of limited safety studies as far as the long-term effects, but there's studies that definitely show that there's weight regain after people stop the medication. Right now, about 12% of adults are currently taking GLP-1s, and then you have a higher prevalence of use in populations by gender and also by age. Most prescriptions are covered somewhat for insurance, although there are cases where insurance stops covering the medication, but there is still an output that people have to pay. Some funds when they are taking the GLP-1. So the cash pay option runs about $400 per month, but then there's cases that insurance is not supporting the medication. And so most people paying for the drug out of pocket tend to be wealthier and can afford, of course, to spend money on the medication, but also those other things that support health. So this is from the Kaiser Family Foundation poll that looks at people that have ever used the medication, currently using the medication, and you see that 50 to 64 that you have a higher use of those medications. People with diabetes, so people with cardiovascular disease, and as Dr. Berry meant, people who have been prescribed the medication to treat overweight or obesity. Although there is a lot of discussion, like I also intersect around the idea of weight stigma, about the prescribing of the medications for who, what, when, and where, and do we have other effective treatments to address health, in addition to the idea that people need to lose weight, and I'll talk a little bit about those. So, a lot of the discussion about GLP-1s and community context have focused on access. So, as I mentioned, high income, college educated, privately insured, they're more likely to initiate GLP-1 therapies. Recent systematic review. So, there's been a lot of discussion about income, about race. A recent systematic, actually, a few recent systematic reviews, but this particular one that looked at sort of a comprehensive focus on racialized and ethnically diverse populations that showed that there was underrepresentation in the actual trials that recruited people that tested both weight loss and safety. Although there have been studies to show that there is very little difference across the populations by race. There has not been studies about income, even though you have fewer people in the studies, that you see a difference in weight loss. Um, and then most of the studies, of course, were in high income countries. Uh, so this is a study that was done, a narrative review actually recently, to talk about this sort of distribution, the high cost and limited distribution of GLP-1s lead to healthcare disparities and different income groups in different countries. And so a lot of the discussion for access has been around access to the treatment itself. Again, although there is some discussion about, is this really where we should be going when it comes to addressing population health? And uh, the studies that really center is thinking about, will the disparity in medication accessibility exacerbate the global health gap in obesity treatment? So there's been several, as we think about context, about policies, particularly in Medicaid and Medicare, with supporting medication availability outside of diabetes, for example, specifically for weight loss when it comes to health coverage. But as Dr. Berry mentioned, we see a lot of side effects as compared to maybe some of the standard medications that were used to support both diabetes, as well as looking at behavioral approaches to weight loss, which come with limited side effects. So GLP-1s, as Dr. Berry mentioned, have been tied to positive health effects. And a lot of this data is still coming out. We don't have long-term studies, although Dr. Berry mentioned in populations with diabetes and others, but those that, the discussion is around specific for weight loss. But there have been side effects that are associated with taking the medication, and several studies that have been done both in some of the original trials that were done, and then in other population sort of surveys like polls about the percentage of people that experience these side effects like nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, or even the hollowed out face that are associated with the taking of the GLP-1s. So again, as I mentioned, there's been a strong focus on the discussion about access. And this has always been part of the discussion when it comes to race or income, even when it was related not to weight, but to diabetes, that really the accessibility of the drugs for diabetes have also we also see some disparities by income, insurance status, and weight, even when clinical details are accounted for. One of the concerns that have been raised in the access conversation about GLP-1s is the idea of unapproved GLP-1 drugs that have been used for weight loss, the thoughts about compounded versions of these drugs that are different from the actual original version of the drug, that issues around safety, and that people that may have less access to income, and you see commercials where these compounded drugs are marketed to people at limited costs. And there's been the FDA, for example, put this out with concerns with unapproved GLP-1 drugs used for weight loss. So improper storage is one of those things that may lead to quality issues, etc. So people that might have limited resources may be more likely to look at a drug that is not the FDA approved drug in its original form. But I think it's important as we think about use of the drug and also recommendations for population health, is that what are those dietary approaches that we need to think about with the drugs themselves, since it's such a high prevalence of people taking them. So further research is really needed to understand the nutritional needs of adults that are taking GLP-1s, and to support the development of nutrition guidelines for these individuals. Since probably in the last 3 years, there's been a huge discussion about what those nutrition recommendations should be and what the interventions should be specifically for people taking GLP-1s. For example, in this review that looked at 10 studies, calorie intake was reduced. So people are eating less calories, but there's few studies that include nutrition education or a dietitian or look at dietary quality. So just 4 studies evaluated changes in macronutrient intake in addition to changes in energy intake. A lot of the studies have focused on energy intake or eating occasion, not on actual dietary quality. In 2025, several colleagues published an article about nutrition considerations for individuals with GLP-1s and looking at reduced appetite, that could reduce nutrient intake, protein needs, fiber, micronutrients requirements like vitamins and minerals, and is there nutrition counseling that goes along? And then if you look at where people may want to be on the medication a very short period of time, and get weight loss, what is the potential of diet to actually help with regain of those that are interested in weight loss? But food environment is still critically important. So diets that are high in protein, low in energy density, are associated with satiety and lean muscle mass retention. So the idea that we need, even though, there's a lot of advocating for high protein, even just what was in the DRIs prior, we know that when you have protein, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, that it helps reduce caloric intake without increasing hunger. And really, it still strategically can help support weight control in both randomized and observational studies, as well as what's critically important is where we're trying to get to is overall health. So medications alone can't really replace healthy food access and supportive environments. We know that diet is associated with long-term health outcomes, and it depends on dietary quality, physical activity opportunities, housing stability, community resources, and access to care. And for some individuals, that may include medication, but from a population health standpoint, we still need to think about diet in the context of people that are taking medication, and then also for the general population that are looking to either manage their weight or have weight maintenance or just think about overall health. So to continue to consider, weight, avoid framing weight solely as an issue of personal responsibility. And this has been in the discussion of medication. If we're so medication focused, are we still thinking about weight stigma, other things that may be contributing to some of the negative health outcomes? And some people have also discussed the idea of potentially things like GLP-1s or medication that focus on appetite as masking eating disorders. So like, are people being screened for different things? What is this holistic package that includes community engaged education, and still non-stigmatizing communication, looking at cultural practices and having shared decision making where patients can think about what's best for them. Another thing that's been talked about is the idea of weight cycling. So when people regain, we know that weight cycling has implications for negative health outcomes, including cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And so the thought about the medications in some context is that the medication really, to maintain weight, that it has to be taken indefinitely. But many people that come to the medication have already experienced a lot of weight cycling, which itself is beyond weight, is associated with negative health outcomes. And so, how do we think about weight cycling in the context of medication? So, overall, diet itself has some positive effects. There's been at the population level, the idea is that diet is good to reduce these disparities and also health, improve health outcomes and longevity and well-being, reduce healthcare costs from a population health standpoint. But even when we look at a population health standpoint, we need to understand with the medications, as people are taking the medications, again, whether you feel positive or negative about the medications, that people are taking the medications, and how do we think about their nutrition needs beyond just the medication for weight loss? How do we make sure that they're able to get the health benefits from a healthy diet through improved access and also high quality recommendations and counseling for those that make a choice that they want to take the medication? And then how do we promote healthy diet and food access overall at the population level to improve longevity and overall well-being? Diet itself, of course, is associated with reduction in healthcare expenditures. And there's been several studies that look at physical activity alone with medication, physical activity alone and with medication, that really can help with weight maintenance, and even without medication or weight loss, actually help with overall reductions in morbidity and mortality. So I'm going to stop there as we open it up for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Odoms-Young. It was extremely informative. There was an incredible take on. You have had a little question about community impact that you kind of answer all. I have a question right off the bat, and you kind of answered already, but I just want your a little bit of a deeper perspective on it. And the question is like, if you think there is a risk that we're trying to like substituting a long-term medication for a deeper structural solution in terms of providing nutrition education to people rather than try to just patch it with a medicine. Which I'm not demonizing this medicine at all. I'm just what my, as you were talking and presenting, my brain went to like, is there a risk that at one point the and we're already seeing some changes, in the in terms of fundings from administration and whatnot. Are we moving toward like reducing the nutrition education because there's going to be eventually a drug down the road that will fix the issue of gain weight and I don't know. Maybe you already answered the question. Maybe you don't have any answer for this question, but
I think it varies, because I was just in a workshop, a wonderful workshop about weight and risk. Like we have these various thoughts about how much risk, and our department chair presented the idea about weight and risk. So in some ways, as far as personal responsibility and being very weight focused, we become very weight focused on one, in one bucket. And then, as Dr. Berry mentioned, there are some studies that associate GLP-1s with individual health. In some ways, we've thought about, people have thought about, can, at least in the disparities conversation, can access to the medication close gaps in a population level? And my argument, honestly, is we need to still continue to focus on people's health, the dietary benefits, and the physical activity benefits. I'm not demonizing the medication, but I think a clinical intervention is going to have a difficulty in improving population health outcomes when we still have environments and other things that are difficult to overcome. So, especially if people decide to stop the medications, I think, as Dr. Berry mentioned, a lot of systematic reviews show that when people stop the medications, they're going to regain weight within less than 2 years. And some studies show that they're going to gain more weight. So the question are GLP-1s for long-term health, is that where the investment should be? There's individual clinical decisions around this between a person and their doctor. I don't want to get into that. But from a population health standpoint, GLP-1s may help for some people and they have helped with diabetes, but is this really a good strategy for overall health, well-being, and longevity? I think that
And
question is out.
yeah, and I think that I mean we are I think that the medical community, doctors, and they've been trying for a long time to push like a healthier lifestyles and highlighting the importance of exercise and whatnot, and but probably mixed success because nutrition education I think is still like one of the basic the first brick we have to lay down in order to create a healthier lifestyle. But I don't know if Dr. Berry have any take on these. I have a couple of questions for you on the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Angela, right? That long term, there's not, you're not clear on all the data sets yet that come out from that. But I think long term, right, you have to have infrastructure to support people making lifestyle choices, changes, and continuing the drug for long term without changing that. I don't know what the benefit will be. And I think the weight regain thing after stopping is definitely an issue that people should be considering if they're taking these drugs and what other things that they can do to try to help offset that.
Yeah, yeah. So one question was that if there is a lot of talk about the pills, GLP-1 pills versus the injection, and one question is do they have the same effect?
Yes, both would be effective, just different routes of administration. I think that's just the pill is new, so we don't have as much real world data on taking the once a day pill. But again, I think they're both extremely effective in their regulation of weight. So I don't see any difference in taking pill versus drug. Maybe just your preference on whether or not needle or not.
Yeah, well, I will go with the pill, but I'm not thinking about it. I'm one of those that is afraid of needles. But so I'm assuming there are some parents in the audience tonight. So what is the current knowledge about GLP-1 medication in children? Because obesity among children is more and more prevalent. So is being used with children and under usually 12 years old is the threshold that is being used in medicine. But if you can give us a brief insight about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, right, these drugs target the hunger system, and they're going to target that biology, whether you're a young person
Okay.
or an older person. So those benefits would all still exist. It's just again, right, do you want to? It's up to you and your healthcare provider to decide
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
whether or
yeah.
not you would do that. So again, that biology exists. So you're going
Okay.
you're going to work on that systems when you give these GLP-1 drugs because these are natural. This is a natural product in our body, right? So our systems are already primed to do that. So you're just enhancing it and making it more long term. So yeah, I wouldn't
Okay.
expect anything different from children.
Thank you. And I have another question regarding recently there's this popular diet that is called intermittent fasting. And I was wondering if there's any interaction between GLP-1 medication and this type of diet that, for a long period of time during the day, there's no any calorie assumptions and, uh, the inhibition that the medicine cause. I wonder if there's any kind of interaction with that type of diet, and that was more a personal curiosity.
Yeah, so intermittent fasting, right, is a way in which some people are controlling the calorie intake, limiting their time, a day of time that they eat, or maybe only eating one meal per day. So if you did this in combination with the drug, right, you would have more suppression of of food intake, right? So uh, I'll push back a little bit on that because I think that there is you have to maintain a certain number of calories per day to have to regulate your body. That's called your basal metabolic rate. And if you eat under your basal metabolic rate, you're going to tend to you know, do a little bit more harm to your body than you might want to. Because those resources have to be accounted for some way. You can think of your body as like a banker trying to balance the checkbooks of how much energy you spend versus how much energy you intake. So, if you combine intermittent fasting or some sort of caloric restriction in conjunction with the GLP-1 drugs, you could run the risk of under eating instead
Yeah.
of managing a different type. Maybe Angela might have some other comments.
I was just going to add to Dr. Barry, a lot of big focus in, at least in our world, is about how to increase GLP-1 within, as Dr. Barry mentioned, like it's a natural part. So there are some studies that show that GLP-1s, like your natural GLP-1s and circadian rhythms, like the idea of when you eat, how you eat, what you eat. So there's more studies, although we always think kind of going to medication, there are studies that think about how GLP-1, your own natural GLP-1s, and part of the intermittent fasting, circadian rhythm type of discussions or research of when you eat, how you eat, meal sequencing. There's a lot more research being done as related to that. So, is it with the intermittent fasting, is it only calorie restriction or is it the meal composition? Is it the meal sequencing? So, we really need to know a bit more about that, of how, because part of it is like hormone signaling, as Dr. Barry mentioned. So those of us that are more on the like population intervention side, we eat all times a day and night. We're watching TV at night and we're eating. But one of the things that, even just limiting, like cutting off when you're eating, and having that in specific times during the day, there are some studies that suggest that when you eat your meals, how much are in those meals, what's in those meals, can really impact your hormones, as well as things like stress. So you may be taking you might take medication as a way, but there are things that you can do to help with your GLP, and your natural, and so we go a lot against that in society. We're high stress, we eat all the time, we're, just our whole thing is off, according to our natural, of the way that we should eat or the way that we should think about food and the types of foods that are available, like healthy fats, healthy protein, fruits and vegetables.
Wonderful. Well,
I
I
have a question.
go ahead, Marcy.
Okay, so I hear from what I understand, so you take the medication, and a lot of people that get off the medication, they are regaining weight. We said 1.7 years. If they go off, they gain that weight. Is that amount that they gain back related to how long they're on the medication? Like if you're on the medication for 1 year, you drop that 20, 30 pounds that you need to drop. You start to exercise more because you feel better. Do you gain, because you were on a shorter time, do you gain back less weight, or is it related, is it the amount they gain after they've stopped taking the medication correlated to the amount of time they were on it? Or is it not?
I
I'm
was going to say that's a Dr. Berry question. I
uh,
know in the studies, I don't, in the ones I looked at, I don't know. They focus mostly on the regain, but I don't remember if I think they adjusted for the time people wanted, but I don't remember if they looked at different periods of time. But you may know, Dr. Berry.
yeah, I'm not familiar with that about timing of the drug and then time of recovery to yeah. Sorry,
I was just curious because I hear people, oh, we were on it and I lost 20 pounds and then I just stopped taking it. And I don't see how that could happen when you hear all these stories about people that gain it back. They make it sound all too good.
I mean, there is a time frame, right? It's not like you stop today and tomorrow you gain the weight back. It's, it's going to gradually creep back up, but our bodies are, constantly trying to adapt to energy and metabolism. And so I don't know, it could take months, it could take a year for someone to it depends on how much energy intake is being considered. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, and
I think
energy expenditure as well. Like
Yeah.
if you look at, because there's one study at least that has looked at GLP-1s in physical activity, in the regain. People still regain though. I think that's the thing that it is something that, long term and also for the population, with regain is the goal. And like some people feel like people should be, can be on the medications for indefinitely, and that discussion is definitely one that people are having. I'm not sure, Dr. Berry, but like the idea is that it's a lifelong medication than a short-term medication. But I think it has a lot of the side effects that go along with it, and the long-term safety needs to be looked at.
yeah, and also I think it's important to consider that when people do take this medication to lose weight, control weight, there should always come with a learning a factor of learning about food. I think that's if you are on a medication and your goal is not to be on the medication forever, it's a good moment to learn more about the food that we eat, how it affects us, and how to transition from when you finish using the medication to a more healthy lifestyle. And I think at least um, what we would hope it happens. And if anybody has any question about nutrition, they can come to Cornell Cooperative Extension. We might have
Mhm.
some some answers. But I have one last question for you from the Q&A, and then I'll let you go. It is if you are familiar with any research into the effect of GLP-1s in joint health. I don't know if there's any research about it or.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we talked about in the very beginning, right, there's some evidence to suggest that um, if you take these GLP-1 receptor agonists, you're going to tend to be less inflamed and have improvement in inflammatory responses. And so these could be indirect results from losing weight or improved glucose regulation. It may not be direct, but there's been evidence to suggest that these drugs do target inflammatory pathways to reduce cytokine production to control that inflammation process. But again, whether or not that's direct or indirect consequence of weight loss is still probably being worked out.
Right. Well, thank you very much, both of you. This was extremely informative. I think we all walked away with much more knowledge about this information. And when we gonna chat with our friend about this, we're gonna have something more to tell them. And I really appreciate your time and thank you so much, both of you, for being here. Thank you, Marcy, so much for helping facilitating these. And if anybody has any last remark, otherwise we can call it a night. And
And anyone that was on, if you want to see it, will be on our YouTube channel.
yeah,
Give us like a week to get it up, but it'll be on the CCE Rensselaer County YouTube channel. So you can go to YouTube and search for CCE Rensselaer County.
well, thank you very much,
Thank
and
you.
Thank
have
you.
a good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.